Yeah.
If a person's able to recognize that I'm externally presenting as male, but I'm not participating in the male social paradigm,
Mhm.
then that gives them a much better understanding of who I am and how to treat me. And I think that's
Mhm.
what pronouns are about,
Mhm.
is giving another person the ability to understand how you're going to fit into the social circle and how you interact, and have respect for that.
Hello and welcome to the 50 Shades of Gender podcast. We get curious about all things gender, sex, and sexuality, as well as relationships, feminism, the inclusive kind, neurodivergence, disability, kink, mental health, and all that makes us humans unique and diverse. From body positivity to body dysmorphia, it's all welcome here. If you appreciate this podcast and want to support us, visit our website 50shadesofgender.com, as in FIFTY, to make a donation, find out more about our allyship course and workshops, and details of how to join our community. Now, join us on a journey of inclusion, acceptance, and respect. I'm your host, Esther Lemons. I am a queer woman, and my pronouns are she and they. In this episode, I have a conversation with Anshar Seraphim, a consultant, trainer, speaker, and neurodiversity advocate. Anshar likes they them pronouns, but because they present as male, they don't really mind he or him. They identify as non binary because of their lack of exposure to gender constructs as an autistic person. Find out what that means to Anshar in this episode. We also talk about expectations of maleness, sensory difficulties, navigating relationships, social exclusion and isolation, making connections, masking, opening up conversations, effective listening, and learning how to treat each other well. It was recorded on the 1st of May 2024. Now let's get into the episode. Hello and welcome. What's your name?
I'm Anshar Seraphim.
Hello,
It's nice to
Ansha.
meet you. Thanks for making time to have a conversation with me today.
You too. Thank you very much. So, the labels that you gave me were, let me just get them up on screen. So, it was non binary dominant, actually. And I was intrigued by the dominant bit because I didn't assume you meant a kinky BDSM kind of dominant, but dominant in the way of, well, I'll let you explain it really. So, what does that mean to you?
Well, I say non-binary, and I think it's for a different reason than maybe some people do. I don't feel like I was misgendered at birth or anything like that. It's
Mm,
more that because I was 75% nonverbal with autism at age 11, so I always had a sense of social exclusion from the social paradigm.
mm,
So it was this really interesting experience of just because I didn't have my first friend until just someone that I would hang out with and for longer than just doing like a shared activity
mhm,
until I was like 25 years old. And when I was a kid and I was going through school, I couldn't talk, so I couldn't connect with the other kids. I was off in a corner by myself. So between that and being raised by two women, especially in a household with two music teachers, because they were never really in the same room as me, I didn't really have anyone to learn a gender construct from.
mm,
Um, male roles in society were very confusing to me, and I outwardly present as male. So if someone says he him or something like that, I don't feel slighted or anything. I try to make the clarification because it's really confusing and frustrating to have all of these expectations of maleness
mm,
on me all the time. I don't engage in the chest puffery. I don't have the mirror neurons as an autistic person to really enjoy like watching sports, and I don't feel a shared victory from that.
mhm.
None of my interests align with that. I'm very into like cognitive systems, but also when I'm going out and having fun, I like going shopping. I like shoes. I like makeup. I used to do coordinate photo shoots
Yeah.
and costuming and all that for all kinds of stuff. So when I was a kid, I played with Barbies and Cabbage Patch dolls, and there wasn't a fear of social judgment for me to explore whatever it was I wanted to explore because there wasn't anyone else around. So
Mm,
whatever I gravitated to, I took interest in, and I played with that. So when I actually started to try to socially integrate, I noticed that there were all of these bizarre expectations for being male, and none of it ever really made me sense to me.
mhm,
So I feel like telling people that I'm non-binary, it's more to help them really, have a better idea how to treat me.
mm,
And because at the end of the day, pronouns can be about you or it can be about them. Is it
Mm.
about reframing your own language and your own ideas to better align with your own identity, or is it about trying to give other people the right information on how to best treat you as a person?
Mhm.
And when I started thinking of it that way, it became very obvious to me that I was non-binary. But I had so many different stages of development to go through to get there.
Mhm.
And with the challenge of not speaking, I'm still about 80% nonverbal in person. The internet's kind of a unique space for me
Yeah.
because I don't have all the sensory input. I don't have to worry about, crosstalk and conversation and lighting and all the stuff that goes on. I didn't get my driver's license till I was 37
Mm.
because of my sensory issues. And I came to realize eventually that the primary reason for me being mostly non-speaking was actually my sensory reaction to my own voice. I had to
Wow.
learn. I'm actually a baritone, and I had to learn how to speak in a different register because what I didn't realize was that my own voice was in a range that was actually causing me sensory issues. So I have to speak like an octave and a half higher than my natural voice to actually be able to speak. There's just a bunch of really strange
Wow.
adaptations that I had to do.
Yeah.
Um, but it
Uh-huh.
all kind of started from me. I asked myself kind of an interesting question in my 20s, which was, yeah, I had like 50 autistic special interests up until that time, and I was like, well, what if I made the brain into an autistic special interest? What would I learn? What would change? And it changed everything. It
Mhm.
gave me a way to understand what was different about me, about what was different about the way that I was thinking, but also the reactions and the social systems of other people, so I could better navigate all of that. And I never in a million years would have thought that that would have turned into a vocation for me. I was
Mhm.
in information technology for like 18 years just because I assumed that with all of my social challenges, it would be the only thing that I could do for a living is sit behind a desk. But after, a couple of decades of studying psychology, I got into this really weird job. I went into the jewelry industry of all things.
Mhm.
And I remember I moved into the Oregon area in Pacific Northwest in the United States. And, I'd been doing tech for a decade and a half, bunch of tech companies up there. So I thought I wouldn't have any trouble finding a job. And I didn't realize that there were like 10 universities there. And the job market was really, really competitive. So here I was moving to a new place, not able to do what I was doing before for a living. And I had to start to think. I almost took a midnight stocking job at a grocery store. I wasn't sure what to do. And then I walked past a jewelry store and I learned and kind of stepped up that understanding of other people by being willing to put myself in challenging situations. And so I was like, wow, so here's an industry where literally what you're selling only has an emotional value, which was hard for me to relate to with autism.
Yeah.
And it was all
Right.
about building personal relationships. Again, really difficult with autism. Up until that point, I had a little bit of a fear of women. And here's a 95% female dominated industry.
Mhm.
So I just remember walking past the store with saw a sign help wanted, and I was like, God, that sounds impossible. Let's do it. Let's see what happens. So it took a little bit of convincing, but they let me start part time. I told them I was very adamant that I really wanted to do it, and I learned so much because with a combined autistic special interest in psychology and the brain, and then being put into those challenging situations over and over again, it just kind of gave me this amazing opportunity to practice those skills every day. And by the end of 7 years, not only was I managing my own $2.5 million unit with like 12 people under me, but I was actually doing all of the training in the Pacific Northwest for like 300, 400 associates who all then, later on became managers and whatnot, teaching them
Mhm.
how to apply psychosocial dynamics and all the things that I had learned on my own journey. I never realized it, but having to break it down to such a degree of simplicity for myself made it super easy to be able to teach those dynamics to other people. And now that's what I do for a living. I left that industry, a decade ago, and now I literally every day that's my job as I teach people psychosocial dynamics. I teach, the principles of cognitive neuroscience and applied behavioral psychology to help them better do what they do. So it's been
Mm.
a really fascinating journey.
Yeah. Wow. There's something in what you said really just now. It was about like the dynamics between people, and then you had no like male role models as such when you were younger. And also you had kind of like a reluctance around women and social interactions with women, and I guess intimacy as well. There's actually, I listened to a podcast the other day. It was We Can Do Hard Things with Glennon Doyle and Amanda and Abby, and Glennon at one point said something like, gender is what happens between two people. Because she talks about not being able to find gender in her, but she can find it on her. And I found that a really interesting one.
Well, we say that phrase that gender is a social construct.
Yeah.
We say that without really thinking about what it means. But
Uh-huh.
how would you be able to really have an understanding of your gender if you were never around anyone, if you didn't have a society
Exactly.
to be in, if you weren't social,
Yeah.
then gender really only is about personal meaning and exposure. And that's really what happened to me with autism.
Yeah.
When I tried to form friendships and stuff when I was a little kid because I couldn't talk to anyone. I didn't understand things like intimacy. I
Hmm.
wanted to have friends and wanted them to like me, but I didn't know what that looked or sounded like, and I was autistic. So I remember one time I got in trouble because I was like 8 years old, and I was chasing the other kids around at the playground trying to kiss them because I wanted intimacy, but I didn't know what that was supposed to look like or how to play
Right.
with them or
Yeah. Yeah.
so and then there's the other part of it too, which is that with autism, the sensory information of the human face was so overwhelming to me. I couldn't look at people and talk to them at the same time. So I missed out on so much of the context. And autism, there's this diagnostic criteria. It's called alexithymia,
Hmm.
and it's a lack of ability to be able to recognize emotional states in other people, but also to have difficulty identifying those same emotional states in yourself. And I think, just my opinion, but one of the reasons that happened for me was one, not being able to really interpret tone, inflection, and context because of the overwhelming sensory information of voices,
Hmm.
but two, to be able to interact with other people, I couldn't even look at their face at the same time. It was like, I don't know if have you ever had that experience of having to turn the radio down to be able to park the car?
Yes.
Okay, it's like that, but on a much
Bigger
larger
scale.
volume,
Yeah.
larger scale, larger
Yeah.
distraction, right?
Hmm.
And so when you're getting too much input, it starts to
Mm.
make certain tasks overwhelming. And so for me to communicate, I was just completely visually disengaged. So it wasn't that I couldn't learn what facial expressions meant. It's just that I wasn't even looking at someone's face when they were talking. So between that and only having female role models, but the reason I got so intimidated by women was that I always felt like being raised by two women and getting along better with women because I didn't understand the male construct, and therefore I never
Hmm.
was consistent with any of the male expectations that were placed on me.
Hmm.
All of my friendships that I wanted to have were with women,
Hmm.
but I felt this strange degree of social exclusion. The things I wanted to do, I wanted to go and sit in pajamas and watch a movie, or go to the go shopping, or go and do makeup, or do this or do that. Things that I had found a love for without understanding that they were associated with this or that. But
Hmm.
there is a there is an importance, a social importance to people who identify as female having their own space,
Hmm.
and having me along would disrupt that space even if I was in a different place in my head. And I don't,
Hmm.
when we're younger, we're learning those social roles, and we focus on the visual, and we focus on all of that stuff. And maybe now in my life, if I looked for the right people, maybe they wouldn't exclude me from something like that. But that was my experience.
Hmm.
So I always felt this desire to connect with women, but also to feel like there was always a barrier up because of the way that I looked, and
Hmm.
that also made me feel a little bit of pain in my soul too. That the
Yeah.
people that I related to most, that I would always be an outlier for them.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. So, how did you end up navigating the space of intimacy? Because right now, as you just said, you're engaged, and what is kind of funny, I guess, is you're engaged to a lesbian. So,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, no, I always joke. I mean, because we were friends for 7 years, right, before we even tried the experiment of dating.
yeah,
So don't just think I was seeking this out or something.
yeah,
I always joke I was in the lesbian friend zone, right?
yeah.
Um, but it was interesting because she's very masked, she's very masculine, and she's the one who knows all about engines. She's the one who builds stuff with lumber and is doing projects, and she's got power tools. And I've learned more about maleness from being around her than I probably ever have around being
Wow,
around a man.
that's so
And
interesting. Yeah.
when she goes to go off to work, she gets all dolled up and she looks all feminine, and then she goes and does that aesthetic for work, and then she comes back, and she's wearing flannel and steel toe boots and a backward ball cap, and it's we're very very out of place. Like I have to wear a certain kind of fabric. All of my clothes in my closet look the same.
Hmm.
Sometimes you'll notice if you look at my interviews and stuff, I'm always wearing the same shirt. Well, it's actually I have 20 of this shirt because I found something that has the right amount of compression and the right texture
Yeah.
so that I'm able to socially interact. Because if I wear something else, it'll make it so I can't talk. Um,
Mm. Too
so
much. Yeah. Too much input.
so I'm always walking around wearing like this, particular shirt with like dress slacks and stuff, and she's walking around and in flannel and steel toe boots, and you know, uh, she swears like a sailor, and it's really funny. It's just people will meet us, and then they'll just double take all the time. But there was a this moment after 7 years where she talked to me and she was like, you are my most effeminate friend,
Hmm.
and it's hilarious to me. And we had that whole talk about gender, and then after a while, because she's not really a big fan of men at all. Like
Right.
I don't want to call her a man-hating lesbian, but I mean she has a lot of internal conflict over the way that men act in society and the way that they treat her as a woman, regardless of knowing her orientation.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
During that 7 years that we were friends, she's married to a woman, so one day she just came to me and she's like, "This is gonna sound really weird, but I'm developing feelings for you, and I don't know how I feel about that because you present as male." And I mean, she's really active in the lesbian community, and I felt this sense of it was like weird. It was like because I always wanted to have those closer social relationships with women, but in a way, it was funny because for me to finally have this relationship, and all of a sudden it's someone who's so masculine. It was kind of ironic to me.
Hmm. Yeah.
Um, but it made me really sad because some of the people in the lesbian community, despite the fact that I do identify as non-binary, they take one look at me and they treat her like some kind of a traitor for that,
Hmm.
and that's a really sad thing
Yeah.
because I would think that a community of people that are so open-minded and inclusive, and understand principles of things like gender and different roles and all of that, that
Mm.
I wouldn't get pigeonholed into a box. But it's more that my partner cares so much about me as a friend, and then developed romantic feelings for me, that she was willing to kind of disregard my physicality rather than be attracted to it specifically. It's not that she finds those things about me attractive, it's that she finds the other parts of me so attractive that she tries to let that stuff not bother her. And
Interesting.
the fact that she was reframing in that way was a big deal to me. And so to see her socially ostracized for that, because it, you know, like many lesbian, winning that part of her identity and being able to understand that, especially growing up in like a more conservative religious background and having to go through a whole journey to be able to understand that dynamic of herself, seeing her get socially excluded from that community. At first, I almost had this desire to like withdraw and just go back into the friend zone with her because I didn't want her to lose that.
Hmm.
And but she told me that was her pain to navigate, and that she had to figure out what that meant. And
Yeah.
so I had to respect that.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. So, what is something about gender that you've learned in your journey, as it were? And I mean, maybe even something like what do you wish I'd ask you about gender?
Well, once I started understanding peer groups and the brain and social reciprocity and all these things that were so alien to me as a kid with autism, at first I found things very confusing, but it's so true in that when we're navigating social relationships, having a framework of the way that we're treated, of the way that we should act, it keeps us from having to always focus on that. It's a crude metaphor, but if um if you were able to care, let's say, about every single person on the planet, when you woke up in the morning, you wouldn't be able to shower or wash your face or eat breakfast. I mean, you would just feel this profound heartache every single day for all of the people that are suffering and dying and starving
Hmm.
and war and conflict. There's a necessity in like primate social groups, let's say, where if you have one tribe of primates and another, and they both go off in separate directions, that you have to care about the survival of your own tribe
Mm-hmm.
more than you do about the tribe that's 10 miles away,
Mm-hmm.
because they are a different social group, and you have to learn to mentally prioritize that.
Mm.
And so as a result, the way that we move in and out of peer groups is really, really relevant because it changes who and what we care about. And you see this phenomenon all the time in a less abstract way. Like here in the United States, we had September 11th, and we lost like 6,000 people. It's a big tragedy. It was on every single news station. But at that same time, like 100,000 people were dying to Boko Haram in Africa, and it wasn't even on the headlines. And that's
Mm-hmm.
because they were outside of our social circle,
Mm-hmm.
and therefore, what was more relatable to us is what we actually cared about, the social proximity.
Mm.
Um, and then when like Charlie Hebdo happened in France, and there's a culture that's more relatable to us, even if it's linguistically different, and then that will be on the headlines. So it's social proximity dictates our care. And when you see like a celebrity, let's say, go to another country and they expand their social circle, then they come back and they all want to be, UN humanitarian ambassadors and adopt children and all of that. And it's because those have become real people to them.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there's a necessity, if you really want to develop empathy and understanding for other people, is that you have to leave your own social circle and travel into theirs and meet them and relate to them and understand them. And as a person with autism who never felt like I was really integrated into any of those spaces, that was a big journey for me. It was a very intimidating journey, learning how to navigate that, and that understanding of the brain gave me enough confidence to be willing to challenge my assertions and deal with all of the challenges to be able to make that happen.
Mm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I was reading your bio and I noticed about the pronouns because you use he pronouns in
Yeah,
your bio, but you said you like they them because you present as male and you don't mind he him.
I more
Yeah.
mind the all of the social expectations that go along with it. If
Yeah. Yeah.
if a person's able to recognize that I'm externally presenting as male, but I'm not participating in the male social paradigm,
Mm-hmm.
then that gives them a much better understanding of who I am and how to treat me. And I think
Mm-hmm.
that's what pronouns are about, is
Mm-hmm.
is giving another person the ability to understand how you're going to fit into the social circle and how you interact, and have respect for that.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's not that identifying as any gender is a disability, but I'm going to use this metaphor just so it makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
If you had if you had a friend who was in a wheelchair, let's say, you have a very visible reminder of what's going on with that person.
Yeah.
And so if that person, I don't know, let's say they, so you're moving and they don't offer to help, you're not going to take that personally because you understand that they have a situation, right? But when you're neurodivergent, like when you have autism or ADHD, it's an invisible disability. And the irony is that the more exposed people get to you, the easier it is for them to take for granted the challenges that you have, because we can't, it's like that person suffering in another country, we can't think about it every single day, we wouldn't be able to eat breakfast. So we learn to take certain things for granted in our social interaction. But one of the things that I found being neurodivergent is that my symptoms were perceived as character traits.
Mm-hmm.
If someone shared an emotion, and then my autistic brain, to want, in an attempt to want to relate to that, I share an experience of my own, because I'm trying to relate what that comes across. Because if a neurotypical person did that, they would probably be a self-involved person who just enjoys talking about themselves. They're
Yeah.
not validating what you're saying.
Mm.
Or if you have ADHD and a person gets one sentence out of a paragraph, it sparks something, and you know that if you don't say something, you're going to forget it 2 sentences later.
Mm-hmm.
You'll interrupt them, and it comes across as constantly interrupting the other person, like you don't care what they have to say.
Yeah.
And it's hard because for other people, behavior is a form of communication, but for us, behavior is a symptom. So
Mm.
it's about the default way that you treat someone. I don't like self-labeling as autistic in conversation just because it doesn't really tell anyone anything. It's true, but all I've really done when I just say the word autism is encourage them to treat me based off of whatever impression they have of autism,
Mm-hmm.
whatever experience they have with autism, then they try, if they have any, to treat me that way. And that's why labels and diagnoses and stuff don't always necessarily belong in the social construct. I think
Mm.
the better way to do things is when you start talking to someone, and this is for all people, is to just make a space for people to express the way to best to treat them. And whether it's being neurodivergent, and hey, if I do this or I do this, it has nothing to do with you. It's a symptom. It's not
Mm.
it's not an intentional behavior. But it's true of all people. Some people are really bad with metaphors. Some people have really bad trauma associated with certain things. If there's a shared space where we're able to, when we meet one another, to talk about the way to best treat one another, then inclusivity doesn't have to become this big social value because it's part of the process of social interaction. But because we don't do that, we move off of assumption. Then labels have to go into the mix, and it's a crude system
Mm.
of trying to remind people to not just take all of their expectations and put them on you and then just treat you as you're an extension of those expectations. So
Yeah.
for me, that's what pronouns are.
Hmm. Hmm.
Here's this whole social expectation of gender construct, and by using certain words, we're putting all of that on someone. And
Mm.
I think that the big takeaway there is that, for me at least, because I said there's different ways of processing the idea of pronouns, that it's an opportunity for me to very easily let them know that don't have a particular expectation of maleness or femaleness
Hmm.
in my behavior. Don't assume the context for my behavior, because I've had to navigate that journey so differently. It would be better if you just focused on what it means to me specifically as a person.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, totally.
Oh, and I mentioned the dominant thing,
Yeah.
right? Because I
Yeah.
know you asked about that.
Yeah.
It's not just like a BDSM thing. It's more that I with all of my sensory issues and all of my social challenges, and not being able to talk to people, there is, irrespective of who you are as a person and whether you have a more dominant or a submissive personality, or the way that you interact with other people, if you're not able to speak, if you're not able to participate in the social construct, then there's no way for you to really express that part of your personality. People will assume, just like they might assume with a pronoun, that you have a very submissive, quiet personality.
Mm.
And it's quite the opposite for me. I have a ton of ideas. I'm I'm an aggressive thinker. I like, deconstructing and reconstructing things. I'm not intimidated by challenge. I just have a symptom that makes it seem as if I do.
Mm.
So if I can let someone know that I have a dominant personality, then, because if a person's very shy and quiet and you don't give them any context, and then all of a sudden, the right sensory conditions happen, and then you burst into, a whole conversation about something, it can make the other person feel as if you have very, very strong opinions about that thing, or that you're being a jerk, or and
Yeah.
so it's more like, if in private, when I get to have enough social proximity to someone, this part of my personality comes out, and I have a very dominant personality. But I've had to learn how to construct the tone of my voice, but my tone of my voice is very monotone, because I was actually I'm a baritone. I'm all the way down here, and I can't speak that way because that was what was giving me sensory issues. One of the reasons I wasn't able to speak.
Mm.
So I had to learn to speak a full octave and a half higher. So here I am walking around, presenting as male, speaking in this high voice, not exhibiting any typical male behaviors.
Hmm.
And there is an assumption, and you can imagine quite often, that I'm a very submissive, shy, quiet person. And then people will sit down with me in private, and I'll go on these long conversations and have all these in-depth opinions, and I'm a very assertive person, but I can't do that because of my challenges. So it's more than just, in private spaces when people have their clothes off. I like to order people around. And I always joke around that BDSM is Simon Says for adults. But I think it's um, I think it's important that, because it expresses who I am as a person, because you can't see it. And it's the same thing with the pronoun. So that's why when you asked me that question in your little forum to talk, I thought it'd be interesting to include that.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Do you think there is any more, or have you found any more of a connection, would you say, between being autistic and not identifying with like typically male, female, masculine, feminine, man, woman, roles in society?
I feel like the way that autistic cognition works, and I can only speak from my personal experience and then my exposure to psychology and neuroscience. My autistic experience isn't someone else's, and I'm
Mm.
I'm happy to say that at least in this stage of my life, I have much lower support needs than someone else. I mean, but I came from a different generation. They'd only come up with a diagnosis of Asperger's and the DSM like 2 years before I graduated high school. And I didn't get my diagnosis with autism until I was 19, and I joined the Navy, and I was
Mm.
still having all these social difficulties. And I was like, well, I got free medical care now. Maybe I'll go, find out what's going on. But now the average mean age of diagnosis is 4 years old.
Mm.
So this this idea of how different my life would have been if I would have, realized some of that a decade and a half earlier,
Mm.
that would have been different. But when you go through that entire developmental process, socially excluded or isolated like I was, gender I would watch other people's friendships and relationships like a third party observer, like watching with the idea that I might never get to experience those things myself,
Mm.
because is for all I knew I was going to be stuck that way forever. I never set out, trying to understand the brain. I wanted to have a better understanding of my challenges to see if I could get around them. And here I am in an online space. I can actually communicate now. If I go back out in public, it's very hard for me. I can't even
Mm.
go to a place where there's, a few people sitting around having breakfast and having conversations. I won't be able to talk.
Mm.
So my operation of social dynamic is very different. I think it's funny because people will meet me online and they're like, "Wow, this guy talks a lot,"
Yeah.
and then they'll meet me in person and they're like, "Is something wrong? He's not saying anything." It's funny. Um,
Yeah.
but it's difficult to have a gender identity when you don't socialize with anyone.
Mm.
And if, the way that the autistic brain, at least in my experience, again,
Mm.
creates linkages and information. With neurotypical people, it's kind of like a telescope, and they're looking at the universe that way. And when you have autism, your senses are all turned up to 90. So it's more like I'm plotting a whole star chart all at once. You're absorbing all of the information. And then when you ask your brain to make a connection, it can be any two random things. The autistic brain will find it's kind of like like a current on both sides of a piece of wood, and everything branches out, and then there's a connection that forms. So if you gave me just two unrelated subjects off the top of your head, go for it.
Fridge magnets and Alpha Centauri.
Okay, so our understanding of the composition of stars is based off of stellar spectroscopy, which means that we're looking at the light that's coming from those stars, and we see what's called the absorption band spectrum, and we take a look at the missing bands that are there in that spectrum to be able to identify the chemical composition of a star, which allows us to know its starting mass. That dictates things like gravitation, and then from that we can also determine, the classification star, OBAF, GKM, and that tells us the life cycle of a star. And an understanding of the way that photons travel and how that also ties into electricity. And magnetism and electricity are really, really closely related because the alignment of ions inside of an object cause basically a building charge that causes directionality, polarity in the Gaussian profile of that. And there's something called the right-hand rule, and it affects the relevance of how electrons move in a system with regard to a magnet. And in some instances, depending on the substance, there's different ways that relationship can generate photons. So when you have an understanding of how electromagnetism interacts with photons, there are specific elements like tungsten, for example, that have a paradoxical reaction up to a certain point with their resistivity, because usually when heat goes up, resistance goes down, and that curve is different depending on the electron band structure. And we can use those same basic ideas to be able to use things like light emitter diodes, be able to use the relationship between electricity and its movement to actually create light, whether that's more on the like the UV end of the scale, infrared end of the scale, with light that's carrying heat information, or even in the rare instances of things like blue light. And all of that ties together because those systems are not only intrinsically related, but then an understanding of both systems together can let you use essentially what is like stellar spectroscopy on a smaller level to be able to understand the subatomic world. Now those just happen to be two scientific things, but if you ask me why a raven was like a writing desk, or why pineapple relates to economic policies in Europe, my brain automatically will create a connection between. I don't
Wow,
I don't even have to think about it
that is
because
so
my autistic
interesting.
brain
Yeah.
builds a system
Mm.
and puts it together, and that connection's already made before I open my mouth.
Wow.
So the way that traditional thinkers, linear thinkers work is they map out specific subsets of information and facts, but the autistic brain doesn't do that. It grabs everything, and
Mm.
then the connection is made on demand. And as long as it's inside of a sphere of exposure, the all of those conclusions and connections are obvious. And that was what was so interesting for me about the brain, is that once I started to understand all the bits and pieces and the cogs and working parts of the brain, then understanding why something was happening became an instantaneous connection.
Mm.
Oh, it's like, oh, this person's raising one ear like this as part of their body language. Well, elevation in one hemisphere of the brain indicates a dominance to either logical or emotional thinking. There's a reason that we are on the phone with people that we know more closely when we use our right ear as opposed to our left ear, which we use for telemarketers or business calls. There is an element of primacy in the physical motions and movements, some of which are involuntary, some of which are cultural or individual specific, which means body language has to be broken down into three different subsets, and that changes our cognition because the somatosensory cortex watches the expressions, physical movements of other people. Not only does it cause us to feel those same sensations, but then it goes into our limbic brain and makes us start to feel and experience the emotions, which is why facial expressions, micro expressions, gesticulations, body language, but then also familiarity with those systems causes us to transmit emotion non-verbally through our communication. And my brain just links the two things together. So
Yeah.
once I get that fundamental understanding, then it changed everything for me as an autistic person, because all of a sudden all of the things that were so socially bizarre to me made sense. And once it made sense,
Mm.
then even if I wasn't participating in the shared social experience of what was going on, I could understand it well enough to navigate it and show respect for those people and respect for that system, but also to be able to be an outlier in that system and have my own identity.
Mm. Wow. Oh my goodness. I'm seriously still impressed that I came up with these two random things on the spot as well. That's quite good for me. Um, yeah.
It was funny. I was reading Alice in Wonderland as a kid, and the Mad Hatter asks, or was it the March Hare? He says, "Why is a raven like a writing desk?" And it was supposed to be, a riddle that didn't have an answer. And right away, my brain was like, "Well, they both have quills tipped in black.
There, I
Is that the
solved
answer?
it.
Oh, there's not supposed to be an answer?
It wasn't a
Okay, that's
question.
confusing." And
Yeah,
then,
but there's an answer
yeah,
anyway. Yeah.
so yeah, so it's just
Yeah.
that's the humor of that,
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
it causes us to store information differently too, because I don't know if you think about it, but when we're like a car crash, things seem to slow down, right? And the
Mm.
reason is that the hippocampus in the brain, when you get that spike of cortisol and adrenaline, you're having a stressful experience, there is an evolutionary primacy to negative emotion. And that evolutionary primacy is for our survival. If a lion chases up a tree, the brain needs to remember that. That's useful survival information.
Mm.
But it's funny when we get into human civilization and tools, and we're not constantly fighting for our survival anymore, some of those evolutionary systems can sabotage us, because your brain will put, and psychologists disagree, it's anywhere from 15 to 50 times as much emphasis on a negative memory as a positive one.
Mm.
But that means that, your brain will have you with one eye open at 2:30 in the morning thinking about a job interview that didn't go well 15 years ago. But
Yeah.
your big milestones and accomplishments, your brain will forget them. Or even if you think about them, you won't really remember the experience with the same clarity. And that's one of the reasons that imposter syndrome exists, is that if you go through a life with your brain automatically remembering all of the bad things that have happened to you and forgetting the good things, it
Mm.
starts to warp the funhouse mirror of your personal perception. Makes you feel like when you have a success that you don't deserve it. You forget all of the accomplishments that got you there, all of the things that you learned from all of those successes. And that's why understanding those neurophysiological principles can be really helpful for personal development. It certainly was for me.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I can relate to a lot of what you said about it's almost like studying, observing other people and the social interactions and dynamics that go on. And I feel like I can relate to that on some level because I remember looking at, I think not so much when I was very young, but I think especially when I became a teenager and it was all about, boys and dating and all that stuff, at least in my late teens. I
I
just,
never thought I would go on a date.
right.
I thought it was never going to happen to me. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I just remember looking at all these ways that people did things socially, and it just made no sense to me. I'm like, why? Okay, so you kind of have to play hard to get, even especially if you like someone. You can't say that you like them. You have to almost back off and do the opposite thing. And then they have to be the one to reach out, but they can't reach out immediately because they have to leave it a few days. Otherwise, they're too eager. And then they're like, and I was like, what the actual fuck is this? You know?
Well, and we don't think about it, right? We take certain social things for granted
Yeah.
that make no sense. Like, for example, if a woman likes a man, when he looks at her, she'll look away. But if a woman thinks that a guy's a creep, when he looks at her, she'll look away. So
Right?
you're like,
Yeah, that's real
you're
clear, isn't it?
confused, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So one of the cool things about learning how to advocate and communicate is that you have the ability to reframe relationships. Just like I did at the beginning of this call. I said, before we got on the call, I
Mm.
said, hey, I have autism. I like to explain how things are connected, so that can cause me to info dump. If I start to do that and it starts to dominate the conversation, I'm not doing it on purpose. Just hold up a finger and I'll wrap up whatever I'm saying and let you talk. I'm not trying to. What you have to say is important to me.
Mm.
But the important thing is to positively advocate, positively share,
Yeah.
you know, because we get into this habit, I think, socially of apologizing for the way that we're different.
Yeah.
And that's a bad way to start. No, thank people for their patience, thank people for their understanding.
Mm.
Up until about age 25, I tried to do the same thing that a lot of neurodivergent people do, which is mask, which just essentially means try to
Mhm.
pretend to be as neurotypical as possible. But you sabotage yourself for two reasons when you do that. The first, and this is an extreme example, but I just use it so for the sake of clarity. I think only like 2.5% of people with Tourette's actually swear, but
Mhm.
let's just say for the sake of argument, you happen to be one of those people. If you're able to suppress, let's say, you have a first date, and you suppress that behavior, that symptomology, that etiology,
Mm.
95% of the date, and everything's going great, and then the last 5 minutes of the date, you drop the f bomb, or whatever, what happened, fuck ass tits, whatever, and then the other person has the worst possible context for being able to treat you well because you never gave them any context, so they assume that your behavior is communication.
Mhm.
And it's the same with anything. So if you can be self-aware enough to explain how you are as a person and
Mhm.
create a space to understand that other person too, then instead of having to use the default mode of social interaction, you can choose to have a different one.
Mhm.
I can say, hey, I have autism. If you're trying to give me signals, I'm probably not going to see them because I'm focused on so many other things.
Mm.
You have to be direct about your intentions.
Mhm.
It's really important to me that you don't do any white lies to me. Because I'm never going to white lie to you, and it's going to create a lopsided interaction where it feels like one of us is being rude all the time. I try when I advocate for myself in friendships and interactions to just be positive about what's different about me.
Mhm.
And I feel like one of the cool ways to do that, and because it only serves that social purpose unless it's for personal identity, is the pronoun, and say, hey, they them,
Mm.
because it invites the conversation when people aren't necessarily always being willing to have it.
Mhm.
Oh, okay. I notice you identify as non-binary. What does that mean to you? It's a great question.
Mhm.
It's an open-ended question. The fact that we're not starting, because if we all started our social interactions with questions like that, we wouldn't need to worry about pronouns. We wouldn't need to worry about inclusivity because we would all be making space for one another.
Mm.
So it's a sad thing that doesn't happen, but there's a need for assumption of a framework sometimes in certain social situations. People take it for granted.
Mhm. Mhm. And how do you navigate that? You mentioned pronouns just now and an example. Do you have any other like examples of that when it comes to gender, perhaps? Like how you navigate that conversation?
Well, look at my LinkedIn profile. I have they, them there.
Mhm.
I feel like it opens up that conversation.
Mhm.
And I thought about it for a while because, like, when you do it in the business world, you do have different generational levels of exposure to gender identity, social dynamics, all of that, and um, human beings don't like change, right?
Yeah.
You get older people from an older generation, and it's not just true of, like, conservative jerks or anything like that. It's the way the brain works, right? It just, like, for me, when I got the autism diagnosis, and they also used the word Asperger's, that became a word that helped lead me to the understanding, because I had no idea what autism was when they first told me I had it. where I started to learn my own identity. And so I had an
Mm.
attachment to the word. Later on, I learned that that word Asper came from Hans Asper, which came from, he was involved with the Germans in World War II. There's a whole bunch of negativity that we went behind it. So eventually the community gravitated away from using that as a label.
Mhm.
But for me, it was soul food. It was the word that allowed me to discover who I was. So maybe I was prepared to let go of that word in the greater interest of better communication, but not all people do. I mean, there's a channel with 500,000 plus subscribers with for autism awareness called Aspie World. I actually was interviewed on there, and
Mhm.
he's not going to stop calling that Aspie World, except that having Asperger's is how it helped him discover his identity.
Yeah.
And our evolution of what we semiotically, semantically associate, the difference between the signifier and the signified in language, that is a cultural, social, and evolutionary process. And so it can cause some people to be how others might describe as closed-minded, and the fact that we're not able to have conversations, I think that's largely due to the last 20 years of the online space. We went from this point of being able to respect differences in opinion and be able to debate and even have a reverse debate and switch positions with someone to learn more about their position. And then we went on to the online space where we don't have to watch the effect of our words on another person always.
Mm.
When we disagree with someone, it's so much easier to just put them into the category of people that disagree with us and then hit the block button or the ignore button because they're a bigot or they're ignorant. Or
Mhm.
but even the most ignorant, racist, bigoted person probably has a few gems in their life that you could learn from. You could disagree with
Mm.
95% of the things that they have to say, and they
Yeah.
could have one opinion or one experience that changes your life. And to polarize people into groups and to group them together and not encourage the dialogue that allows us to change thinking, it only encourages that system to perpetuate. So but we all have this experience of using the online space to socialize, using it for entertainment, using it for all these positive feelings. So when an antagonist comes into that and starts, questioning our ideas or our values or beliefs, and something that's very obvious to us is not obvious to them, it's very easy to just label them as ignorant and push them out of the way. But
Mm.
how are we all going to lift each other up? And I think if you sat down with a person who is very against, gender fluidity or anything like that, and you actually explained the experience of being misgendered at birth, or one of my friends is intersex, actually being born with both sets of equipment, and for a long period of time,
Mhm.
a very, very long period of time, those people would just be involuntarily given surgery,
Yeah.
as babies, and the parents would pick a gender regardless of what their hormonal no one understood that stuff.
Mhm.
And you could literally be living, as a person who was mutilated and
Yeah.
having to put, I socially identify as the wrong gender, literally physically being the wrong, just because you had an extra set of sexual organs they picked wrong.
Mhm.
So the problem is that in order to create a value system, when you create a value system, then all of the outliers, all of the stream of that whole experience becomes polarized, and people want to take a stance on certain things, and it's mostly out of a kind of ignorance.
Mm.
There's some people that, let's say, their son or their daughter comes out, and maybe I identifies as with same-sex attraction, and they will just literally throw them out of the family. But other people will learn a kind of tolerance that they never thought that they would have before,
Mm.
from that process of actually knowing that person, seeing them grow up, see them grow into that other person, and realizing that it's not a choice, that it's not,
Mm.
but that understanding has to come from exposure. And if we're unwilling to expose ourselves to one another,
Mm.
then how can we have the dialogue to change things?
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah. Like a willingness to just be open and stay in the room and have conversations with people.
Well, it's about reframing too,
Mhm.
because the physical experience of emotion
Mhm.
can have different contexts. That your body doesn't really know the difference between nervousness and excitement. It's about your psychological framework. All the
Mm.
physiological symptoms are the same, minus possibly the stress hormone. But I mean, you can get into eustress and all that. So the idea is that when you have energy, it's how you choose to direct it.
Mhm.
Let's say you have some security issues and you're a jealous person, let's say, and you know that about yourself. You take ownership over it. And when you feel that jealous energy, you decide what to do with it. Okay, well, when I feel jealous, I'm going to do something nice for my partner to elevate, my treatment of them and make me feel more secure. I can choose to direct that energy differently.
Mm-hmm.
If you come across a person who's ignorant and is judgmental, if you learn to get excited about the fact that you have different points of view and you express that in your emotions and you have that reaction instead of the reaction that they're anticipating, you cause them to reframe that conversation and be more willing to have it with you.
Mm-hmm.
I'm really excited you said that. Why don't you tell me more about why you feel that way?
Mm-hmm.
Let me hear what you have to say. Because if you can show another person that you're able to follow their steps, follow their work,
Mm-hmm.
and you can explain back to them why they have the opinion that they do, they won't have anything else to say.
Mm-hmm.
And that's effective listening. We were all taught these weird communication things in the '90s about the nodding and follow up questions and stuff, but that's not real listening. Real listening is what I like to call the suspension of certitude.
Mm-hmm.
Whatever you know, hold back for a second. This person might be using the wrong words, have a different understanding of the topic than you, have different feelings, opinions, information, and
Mm-hmm.
totally understand their argument
Yeah.
before you react. Because the desire to emotionally react, what it really does is it you got the triune brain, right? It kicks you out of the cognitive, puts you into the limbic. You're having a complex emotional reaction or even a
Mm-hmm.
lower brain reaction, anger,
Yeah.
and it screws up your cognition.
Mm-hmm.
We don't make you don't make good decisions when you're angry because you're not in that brain. That part of your brain is not most active. It's influencing everything else. So
Mm-hmm.
if you're having a reaction, emotional reaction to something that someone's saying, that's the worst time to try to have a discussion with them about it. Finish listening to everything that they have to say. See if you can relate and understand and figure out how they got there with their experiences. Be able to explain it back to them. And then, if nothing else, you've put that person in the position of, well, they completely understand my argument. Why am I not doing the same for them? Even if I
Mm.
disagree with them. You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
you have to lead with the behavior you want. Now, you
Mm.
come across a narcissistic personality or whoever who's not willing to participate in that with you, you got to identify that toxic person and just, create some distance. But getting psychopathy out of the way, I think that's the way to treat your fellow human beings, in my opinion. I mean,
Mm.
again, just my experience, my opinion, but that's what I've come to learn from studying the brain.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. That's really beautiful. Is there anything else you'd like to add before we wrap up?
Sure. I think that one of the things that happened when I started to get exposure, especially as a person who had to take really small social steps in relationships, if I wanted someone to have a takeaway from this conversation,
Mm-hmm.
I want to share something
Mm-hmm.
because I had this pattern in my friendships and my relationships where it's like a slow reveal, where I would be waiting 6 months, or 3 to 6 months before I revealed all of myself to that person.
Mm.
And I used to think that, it was about developing trust or doing this or doing that, but I realized that it was actually about my fear. And
Mm-hmm.
it wasn't about the quality of the interaction. Because if you really want to give another person the ability to treat you well, you have to be able to speak to the things that are important to you and why. Otherwise, you're doing that same thing. You're masking. You're pretending that you're a
Wow.
person who doesn't have an issue or doesn't need something or doesn't, have a sexual proclivity or doesn't look at relationships a certain way.
Mm.
And so the only thing that you've really done at that point is let that other person go 3 to 6 months feeling more and more stable in a relationship or a friendship with you, and then changed all the expectations. That process is not for their benefit; it's for yours.
Mm-hmm.
The time to learn from someone how best to apologize to them is not when they need an apology. That's going to invalidate them. The time to figure out how to resolve conflict with a person is not when you have conflict and you're both stuck in the middle brain and you're already arguing and invalidating one another.
Mm-hmm.
Learning about how to resolve conflict, what a person needs. There's simple systems like love language and stuff like that, but whatever system you use, taking the time to ask the right questions so that we have this silly thing that we're taught, which is the golden rule: treat other people the way you want to be treated. And it's very simplistic, and it only works when we're just with an absolute stranger and we're just trying to give them the benefit of good treatment. But I think a lot of people don't consider that there's a higher level of interaction, and it's what I call the platinum rule, or it has been called the platinum rule in the past, which is where you try to learn how to treat that person, you know?
Hmm.
Because if I it really means a lot to me when someone gives me words of encouragement, but you're the person who, needs to see an actual concrete, act of service, or it all means nothing unless someone takes the time and to actually spend time with you, or you
Hmm.
have to be able to transmit that, because otherwise you're just making another person fail upward in your interaction because you don't know yourself. um, I used
Mm.
to be so intimidated to tell people who I really was and what I really wanted. And when I learned to have those conversations when all of the energy was high, when that excitement is high, when you initially meet a person, when there are no problems that are currently happening, and you're concerned about what happens when problems do arise and how to best take care of that, that is the best framework that you can give that other person to treat you well and for you to learn how to treat them well. But it takes escaping that fear. And if I can learn how to do that as an autistic person who literally didn't have my first friend until 25, that had so much difficulty having conversations, if I can develop that skill, so can you. So if you're going to have a takeaway from that, it's just a very simple thing. Get out of your own way and don't apologize. Don't apologize for who you are, what you want. Just positively share your challenges and your journey and what it's come to make you need out of life. And if that other person's not comfortable giving that to you, isn't it better to know right away?
I'd say so, yeah. That is very apt, actually. I love that. And it is something that I've struggled with and still do. And I think I can relate very much to what you say about it's not about building trust and safety so much. I think on part maybe it is, but also it is about worrying about being all of who you are because of all the conditioning and everything like that. So, yeah,
And
yeah.
when people show you who they are,
Believe
believe them.
them.
Listen.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because the way that a person acts initially, um, their framework, or they might be, false flagging this, but the same patterns and systems of behavior are going to be there in that person until they grow and develop as a person. And that's their journey, not something that you're necessarily going to be able to catalyze. If anything, sometimes putting pressure on something like that actually makes it happen slower, because then it
Mm-hmm.
creates more anxiety over that change. And people are much more apt to change if it's a personal plan, if it's their personal plan, if it's their personal journey. So when you recognize a pattern in someone that's unsatisfactory, you have to really ask yourself, what's the difference between what I want and what I need? Is this a deal breaker for me or not? Because if it's not a deal breaker, I need to take the pressure off of this other person and just let them have their own journey. If it's something that I need, well, then I got to have a conversation. Hey,
Mm-hmm.
this is happening. This is what I need. If that's a realignment you can make, I'm not asking you to change who you are. I'm asking you to change your behavior. If that's
Mm-hmm.
not something you're comfortable doing, let's talk about it. Because then maybe we need to, figure out what our social interaction looks like, have respect for each other, maybe, agree to disagree. Maybe just being acquaintances is better than being friends.
Totally. Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing, Anshar.
Of course, and if anyone's interested in getting in touch with me, or you're interested in my professional services, because I do teach psychosocial dynamic communication,
Hmm.
high stakes persuasion, negotiation. I design psychologically driven sales systems. I do psychological analysis of like web content, copy. I've been doing copywriting for 22 years.
Hmm.
I do advertising, marketing, because of that understanding of the brain.
Yeah.
My clients are on the Forbes list, on Time's list of most influential people. Been interviewed by podcasters like Tim Ferriss, been on Nightline. So I'm very good at what I do, and that's not a humble brag. It's because I've had to work so hard to be able to do it, and it's really cool to be able to take those systems of knowledge that have helped me and use it to
Hmm.
help other people follow their dreams. So I'll
Yeah.
give you a link to my electronic business card if anyone wants to get in touch with me. It's got more about my story there and some other interviews.
I will link it in the show notes. Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you.
Perfect. It was so great to have this conversation. Thank you for having it with
It
me.
was. You too. You can find out more details on the website at 50shadesofgender.com/Anshar, which is ANSHAR, where you can also read the transcript, and you can find Anshar on links are on the episode page. Thank you for listening to the 50 Shades of Gender podcast. You can find us online at 50shadesofgender.com, on social media, and on YouTube. Again, if you appreciate this podcast and want to support us, visit our website to make a donation, find out more about our allyship course and workshops, and details of how to join our community. We hope you will listen again. Until then, stay curious and open-minded.